Apple have finally done it. After months, no wait, years in fact, of frustration from the iPad user base regarding Apple's inability to match its industry-leading iPad hardware with equally high-performing Pro software. Apple have announced that both Logic Pro and Final Cut Pro will be coming to the iPad on the 23rd of May. But will it be the multi-touch pro-grade laptop replacement that everybody's been hoping for? Or will it be an oversimplified, workflow-limiting Logic Pro Lite version that some users are now fearing? Let's discuss. So, as a home studio hobbyist who's been making music on Logic Pro for the best part of about 10 years now, I am pretty intrigued to see how Apple is going to replicate the somewhat feature-rich, versatile yet pretty complex DAW that is Logic Pro. Don't get me wrong, I am a huge fan of this DAW. For me, personally, it's probably the best one out there, especially for working with live instrumentation. So to have even some of that capability on a portable device is pretty game-changing. But exactly how game-changing is it? And with portable devices becoming more and more capable, could it spell the end of the professional music studio? That's probably a topic for another video. For now, let's talk about how the iPad experience for Logic Pro will be different to the tried and trusted Mac. So the most obvious thing to note from Apple's announcement is the fact that Apple don't seem to have just taken Logic Pro from the Mac and put it on the iPad. They've actually completely redesigned the application from the ground up for multi-touch. The layout is very different, for example. They've even changed the browser for plugin presets, instruments and audio patches. And they seem to have come up with a very intuitive way of enabling us to use plugins on the iPad. On their website, they've shown this sort of tile layout. These tiles look to work really well on a really compact device and look to have only the most common controls on them. But you can access the full parameters like you would see on a Mac just by clicking and expanding that tile. That's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of that feature. Not to mention that you can use the Apple Pencil to hand draw any automation lines. Really digging that. I have to say, those two features alone have got me pretty excited to get this in my hands. There is something to be said about making music production more tactile. I've always wondered why guitarists like myself still prefer physical pedals with those knobs on them in 2023 versus those sort of digital ones where you can sift through the different sounds. There's just something about touching the thing and physically changing the sound that just makes it way more expressive. And I do think that if given the choice, everybody would go for a more tactile experience, especially novices. I do think the Mac version of Logic Pro can be a bit overwhelming to a lot of newcomers, but a more simplified, touch-friendly interface on an iPad might prove to be an easier learning curve. And that's definitely a win for both Apple and its users. For me, the prospect of having pro-grade software on a portable device like an iPad is pretty revolutionary. Not that you can't create music on a MacBook, that's basically what I do, but I guess having that same functionality on something that's even more portable just removes more friction and laboriousness. I think where the iPad will shine above a MacBook though is when you're traveling and you think of an idea and you just want to get it down as quickly as possible. I can see an iPad being really great for that, especially if you're a beat maker or you just use a lot of software instruments. Just being able to whip the iPad out whether you're in the back of a taxi, in a cafe or just sat on the sofa at home, and using multi-touch or the pencil just to etch in an idea is pretty cool. Now, I do want to touch on the elephant in the room. Yes, the subscription model. It does seem to have gotten a fair few people riled up, but not me. Look, I mean, I get that when you pay for some software, you want to pay for it once and then you want to own it forever. I think everybody wants that. And paying for the same software on two separate devices is pretty annoying. I get it. But I've started to think about this from a different angle. Apple is charging £5 or $5 a month to use Logic Pro or Final Cut Pro. $5 a month. That's lowering the barrier to entry for so many people. For those people that either can't splurge £200 or north of $200 for a piece of software in one go, or for children or teenagers that want to have a go at producing music themselves, but at the same time don't want to commit to that full amount just in case that hobby doesn't really go anywhere or it turns out that music production isn't for them. For me at least, when I think about it that way, I just think we're going to see an exponential rise in home studio producers and musicians, which can only be a good thing, right? Now, all of that said, I do have some reservations about Logic Pro coming to the iPad. And the first sort of red flag for me is that Apple keeps calling it a pro-level piece of software on their website. And if you know Apple, then you know that Apple have been very blasé about calling things pro in the past. So here's a few things that I think might not end up being pro. Okay, so in at number 1 on my list of worries, plugin and instrument compatibility. If you know third-party plugin brands and you've used third-party plugins for a while, then you know that most third-party plugin companies are not exactly very good at keeping their plugins up to date, especially when Apple issues new software. I mean, you only have to look as far as Sound Toys or Native Instruments to see how long it took their plugins or software instruments to be compatible with Apple's M1 chip. So far, Apple have announced that Baby Audio, FabFilter and Moog have all created plugins that are now compatible with the iPad. And from the website, looks as though there are a few more brands, but that's kind of it. There are countless third-party plugin manufacturers out there. And the fact that third-party plugin makers now have to manage compatibility and push out updates for 2 separate platforms, I don't know, I just can't see it. I just can't see a world where all of these plugin companies are making 2 versions of the same plugin, one for iPad and one for Mac, and they're updating both of them regularly. Who knows, I'll probably be proved wrong at some point, but guess we'll see. If there is a positive to take away from this, it's that when Apple does something, the whole industry usually follows suit. So although I'm a bit apprehensive, I do think third-party plugin makers will have to either get on board this iPad train or just get left behind. But yeah, guess we'll see. So Apple's entry-level iPad Pro with the M2 chip comes in at about $800, and it still only comes with 128 gigabytes of storage in 2023. Right off the bat, that is not a pro-level amount of storage. And with storage-hungry logic files, storage-hungry plugins, and storage-hungry sound libraries, you'd hope that either Apple's found a way to optimize logic files on the iPad so that they're a lot smaller than they are on the MacBook, or that you can now plug in an external hard drive into your iPad just like you can on a Mac. Either way, that is a perilously low amount of storage to have on a music making device. No doubt Apple's thought of this, so I am really interested to see how they're going to solve this problem, because I do think it will be a problem for many users. Now, I am a little bit worried about the general workflow capabilities of making music on this thing, from recording to producing to mixing and then mastering. I'm not really convinced that the iPad is going to fulfill the criteria for each of these music making steps. My guess is that most users will use it for a spot of recording and mainly production. That's about it, I think. Now, Apple says that you can export logic files from your iPad to your Mac, but I haven't seen anywhere on the website that says that you can do the reverse. Can the app really be called Pro if you can't transfer a complex session from your MacBook onto your iPad? I'm not sure, and I'm not yet convinced that Logic on the iPad will measure up to the same level of performance as you would get on a MacBook. Which takes me back to that original question of who is Logic Pro on the iPad for? Is it for casual users and hobbyists, or is it actually for professional music makers? Okay, lastly, I just want to leave you with my hot take on this thing. In creating the experience for Logic Pro on the iPad, Apple most likely stumbled upon new features or new ways of doing things that they now want to bring to the Mac. Surely that's inevitable when you're redesigning a piece of software from the ground up. So, with that said, could we see a revamped, slightly redesigned version of Logic Pro for the Mac later on this year? One that even maybe takes a few features from the iPad version and brings them to the Mac. If we do get this, let's say, will it be a free update for the Mac, or will we have to pay to upgrade? Food for thought, I guess. So there you have it, an even blend of excitement and apprehension. One thing that does put me at ease about all of this is that Apple do tend to listen to their users these days. Just look at what they did with the MacBook Pro. And with Apple seemingly engaging with online creators and musicians like never before, even if it's not perfect on the day of release, I do think Apple will find a way to pull it out of the bag this time. But enough about what I think. Let me know in the comments below if you're excited or a bit worried about Logic Pro for the iPad, and what you're excited or worried about. Subscribe if you're new, and if you fancy watching some more Apple related content, here's a link to a video you should watch next. See you later.